There's not a lot of truisms in marketing, right? The answer is often it depends. But one of the truisms is that the best way to grow any business, your business, my business, any business of people tuning in, is for your customers to do that growing for you.
In a world where marketers are so focused on website optimization, SEO, digital ads, and automated campaigns, it can be surprisingly easy to miss one of the most important and efficient sources of new qualified leads: your own customers. And in particular, those customers who love to share stories about you because you've given them a remarkable experience that's truly worth talking about. Not how much they love your product or your service, but real conversations driven by exceptional experiences that turn them not just into supporters and advocates, but walking, talking, trusted promoters for your business and your brand. And whether you're big or small, in B2C or B2B, these talk triggers can go a long way in generating new business, not from digital conversions, but from real human conversations. Welcome to Creating Connections, the show that explores the human element in an increasingly digital world. I'm your host, Tyler Lessard, and today we're speaking with the legendary marketing consultant, Jay Baer, one of the greatest influences on my own career as a marketing leader and a podcast host, and someone who knows a thing or two about the art and science of creating conversations. So, Jay, you've been a busy guy for the last 10 plus years. You are the founder of Convince and Convert. You have written several books: Utility, Hug Your Haters, and now your latest project, Talk Triggers. You're also in the Hall of Fame as a keynote speaker, MC, and a game show host, which we'll talk about later. In that time, you've been doing an incredible breadth of things and working with countless businesses. So I'd love to just kick this off by hearing a little bit about your perspective on how things have evolved over this last decade of marketing and sales and business. What have you seen as some of these macro trends that have gotten you to what you're talking about here today?
Well, there's a million things that have changed, and depending on your unit of measure, things have changed since we started this call. That's the that's the job security part of this industry, right? As soon as you got it figured out, they change the rules. You no longer have it figured out. You got to go learn that. But I think if you look back, whatever 5-10 years, the three big moves on the chessboard that I believe have kind of changed everything else would be first, the rise of algorithms in marketing, right? So before, customers decided at some level like what they tuned into, whether they subscribed to your newspaper or listened to your radio station or what have you. But there weren't robots, again, in keeping with the theme, behind the scenes determining what things you saw and what things you didn't see. And so now every company of every size, shape, and description has to play this algorithm game. The first algorithm that we all sort of contended with in any real sense was sort of the search engine rankings algorithm, right? So what web page becomes first, what web page becomes 11th when you do a search. That was kind of the first taste of that, and now, of course, it's everywhere in almost every form of digital marketing. And so I'd say algorithms would be the first one. The second one I would say would be the ability for businesses, including your customers, to actually optimize and improve their marketing over time in a sort of smart, planned, scientific way. I am old enough to remember a time when to make your marketing better, you kind of used your gut and your intuition and kind of hope that this month was better than last month. Now you don't really have to guess at anything. You kind of know the answer, or you can at least find the answer out. So whether it's big data or AI or magic robots, ultimately you have the ability to optimize over time, and that's a big win. And the third thing I would say that's happened over the last decade or so is a real sort of minimization of consumer trust in business in general. There's lots of studies that suggest this, that we just don't trust companies as much as we used to, partially because companies have let us down or they've lied to us, or there's a number of reasons that don't need to be legislated here. But in general, we trust companies less and we trust each other more. And so what that has spurned is a new focus on word of mouth marketing, a huge emphasis on influencer marketing, all the kind of things that would set up a circumstance where real people are doing your marketing instead of the company doing the marketing. So probably those three trends are the three that I think make the most sense to me when I look back and say, where were we a decade ago?
Yeah, it's interesting because it has this sort of pile-on effect of, we start with those algorithms, and now we're building tech on top of that to be able to track and understand how well are we using those algorithms and what's really working and what's not. But I think today, now more than ever, to your point, there's the human element that is almost coming back into the world of marketing for many of us, where we were 20, 30 years ago in the Mad Men advertising world. It was all about the human brand and the storytelling and the emotion. And I feel that pendulum is now starting to swing back. And
And
you
I think it'll
actually,
it'll swing back even more so as more and more companies start to really adopt AI, and AI sort of, I don't want to say by definition, but one of the byproducts of AI is in many cases less humanization, or at least less of a human flavor, and so I think you'll start to see more and more companies, maybe not as the totality of their marketing, but at least part of their approach will be sort of a humanity initiative, right? To kind of counteract the more data centric parts of what they're doing.
so, and on that point, I find it interesting if I go to your website, your jaybaer.com website to learn more
Hmm.
about you and some of the programs that you're running today. The first thing I'll see on that site, at least at time of recording here, is does your customer experience create conversations? I think is a great initial sort of challenge point. And I found it interesting reading that as that first statement because we don't often think about creating conversations with our audiences in most marketing that we do today. Most marketing is talking at them and hoping that they engage with us. But I think, to your point, modern sort of human engagement is all about the conversations, and whether they're between us and our audience or our audience amongst each others. And I think it's a really interesting perspective. Where did you come, sort of how did you come to that, and how is that manifesting in what you're really working with companies on now?
Well, there's not a lot of truisms in marketing, right? The answer is often it depends. But one of the truisms is that the best way to grow any business, your business, my business, any business of people tuning in, is for your customers to do that growing for you. One of my favorite quotes in business is from Robert Stevens, who's the founder of Geek Squad. And Robert once said that advertising is a tax paid by the unremarkable. Now, that's not 100% true. There is a time and a place for advertising for sure, but there is some wisdom in that statement that if you do something that encourages your customers to tell your story and they tell that story, the customers will do the things that you generally have to rely on advertising to do. And to me, as a strategist now for 30 years, that's the holy grail, right? If I can turn my customers into volunteer marketers, if I can turn the customers into the most effective sales force, my work here is largely done. But the challenge, Tyler, is that we have convinced ourselves in business over the last 2 or 3 decades, in particular in B2B, I would say, that we have convinced ourselves that competency creates conversation. That if you just run a really good business, if you just execute, if you're just solid, that people will notice that and talk about that. The problem is that's not actually how human beings behave. Like, it sounds good on paper, but it doesn't hold up in the real world, because I don't know everybody tuning in. I probably know some of you, but I know this for a fact. Nobody ever says, "Hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had," because that's not a good story, right? It's not a good story to tell, and it's not a good story to listen to. So the reality is this: competency, operational excellence keeps customers. Word of mouth and customer storytelling is what gets customers, right? So when we talk about customer experiences that create conversations, what we really refer to are talk triggers, which is the name of my most recent book. And a talk trigger is an operational choice designed to create customer conversations. It's something that you do differently in your business, and you do it because you want customers to remember it and tell other people about it. And some of the most interesting brands in the world are really, really good at that approach. And it's a incredibly cost-effective way of customer acquisition.
Yeah, I find that if you can bring these things together from a using things like word of mouth and talk triggers to acquire attention amongst audiences, and doing that through your advocates, but then being able to hold their attention by actually delivering interesting moments and experiences throughout the rest of that
For sure,
journey.
you got to back it up, right? It can't just be like, hey, look how awesome we are. We rented an elephant, but we actually suck at our core business. Like, that doesn't work. Like, you can play that game for a year and then everybody realizes that, the emperor has no clothes, and then you're done, right? So you really have to, you got to be able, you have to have both, right? You have to be able to execute and then add the storytelling on top of it. That's the best possible scenario.
Let's talk a bit about this idea of word of mouth. And when you look at the world of B2B, like that I live in, and it's hard to think about how does word of mouth really happen in our market, and what are talk triggers? Like, why is somebody going to advocate on behalf of a business, as opposed to in our personal lives? I think we can all appreciate, we had an amazing experience at a hotel, and we talk about that when we go home with our friends and family, because we have a bigger sort of consumer oriented story around it that it plays into. I'm really curious how you think about the idea of word of mouth and talk triggers in the more general business or business to business world, and if you have examples of those who have done it effectively that we can all actually learn
Yeah,
from.
it's interesting. Actually, word of mouth is more important for B2B than B2C. More important. The data show that word of mouth influences 50% of all purchases, but word of mouth influences 91% of B2B purchases. Partially because there's so many people involved in most B2B decisions, right? You don't have one buyer. You've got one buyer and that guy's boss, and then his boss, and then this other guy in a different department. And if they all or some of them are familiar with the story, whatever the story is, whatever the talk trigger is, you are much, much, much better off. I'll give you an example. One of our clients is a company called Superior Glove, which is outside of Toronto. They are a B2B manufacturer of work gloves. They make tons of different kinds of gloves, right? So, like really a puzzlingly large number of gloves. If you're like a left-handed vampire working on an oil rig, they got a glove just for you. Like, it's crazy, right? So they have so many different kinds, and they're really high quality. They're really committed to doing the glove thing well. They compete against a series of kind of frankly lower quality manufacturers from Asia, less expensive, lower quality. So they hired us to create this program to make people understand that they're high quality, and to tell a story about the gloves. So we went through the whole talk trigger strategic planning process, the same process we use for all of our clients at Convince and Convert. And we came up with 3 ideas, and they're in the process right now of testing the 3 ideas, which is something that I very much recommend, that if you're going to do a word of mouth initiative, that you use it in a test case, see how talkable it is. If it works, then you expand it to the whole enterprise. 3 ideas, Tyler. First idea is baby gloves. You know how, like, when you go to the shoe store, they've got like the super tiny Nikes like this big, and it's like the cutest thing ever. So now when you order a box of gloves from Superior Glove and it comes to the warehouse kind of safety manager, usually is the person who kind of runs that at the factory. Safety manager gets the gloves, and there's tiny, tiny, tiny baby gloves in there for that person's kid or their baby, and then a note and instructions to take pictures of them on Instagram. So that's idea 1, working great. Idea 2 is on the actual cardboard boxes that contain the gloves, there are outlines, like a pen outline of different hands. And they are famous hands of famous Canadians. So you have to guess whose hands they are, and you go to a special website and think, that's Celine Dion, or that's William Shatner, or that's John Candy, or whatever. And there's a whole contest with prizes to emphasize that, again, this is a Canadian company, not the low-cost guys from Taiwan. Third idea is my favorite. And on the back of every pair of Superior gloves, there is a logo. The new thing is you scratch the logo, and maple syrup scented work gloves is the third idea that they're testing. So all 3 of those, right? If any of those things happen to you, the likelihood is that A, you're going to remember it, B, you're going to tell a story about it, which C, gets them new customers at minimal additional cost. So it absolutely can work for B2B. And in fact, because, and I'm not necessarily talking about Vidyard here, but in general, I'm going to say this, most B2B companies are boring as shit. They're like constitutionally required to be boring. They never want to be like interesting or dynamic. They're just trying to adhere to best practices. So if you just do one thing in B2B that is actually noteworthy and interesting, it will definitely stand out and it will definitely work.
Well, and it also harkens an interesting point, which is in B2B marketing, we typically tend to think about the pre-sale process, right? It's all about, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, how many people can we move through into the sales team? And I think most organizations lack a real focus on post-sale customer marketing and activation,
No
which
longer
as you
your
talk
problem.
through
Customer
this,
success can
I
deal with
mean,
them
we
now.
can that's right. And then customer success is, generally, reacting and keeping customers happy, but not creating active advocates and evangelists. And so I think it's a really just interesting thought and thought experiment for many of us to go through is that post-sale experience. Not only how can we help make sure that we're delivering a good experience or that we're driving upsells, which is where we also get caught in as marketing organizations, but how do we create, true acts of word of mouth, of evangelism, of advocacy in creative and interesting
Yeah, I
ways?
mean, you just have to give them a story to tell. You have to give them one thing, right? Just one thing that they don't think about. And there's a lot of different ways to do it that we talk about in the book and a very detailed process. This is not a thing we just sit in a conference room and say, "Hey, here's a fun idea." Like that's not going to work, right? So you really do need to follow the process. But it can be so effective. There's an accounting firm in Indianapolis, not too far from where I live, very small B2B. They do small business tax returns, right? I think there's like 3 accountants in the firm and a couple of associates and a receptionist, like 6-man firm, right? There's thousands of accounting firms just like that in North America. These guys have a talk trigger though. Their deal is anytime a client calls or emails, they respond within 5 minutes. Period. Within 5 minutes. If you're trying to get a hold of Paul and Paul's on the phone, then Bob calls you. If Bob's on the phone and Paul's on the phone, then the receptionist calls you, or whatever. But somebody will call you back within 5 minutes. Now, I've had a bunch of accountants in my life, Tyler, and they've, I mean, whatever, right? They're fine. But here's the story I don't tell. Guess what? I went to my accountant, all the numbers added up. Like I expect that to happen, right? That's not a story. That's competency, right? Responding to every call and email in 5 minutes is a story. It's also competency, but it's intended to create conversation, and it does. So, what I love about talk triggers and word of mouth is that quite literally any business in the world can do this. You just have to want to, and then come up with the operational idea, and then be disciplined enough to make it stick. That's it.
So, on that vein, Jay, do you yourself have a talk trigger for your own business?
So, yes, and kind of. So for Jay Baer speaker, we absolutely have a talk trigger. Uh, as you may know, I am a person who always wears plaid suits on stage. And when talking to you, I have about a dozen of these plaid suits, different colors and combinations. Hashtag pick plaid. So the way it works is when a meeting planner books me to give a presentation at an event, a week out, my team sends that meeting planner a link to a special website. That website URL, you can go there now if you like, is dressjaybaer.com. You go to dressjaybaer.com and it has all of my suits there, and the meeting planner can select which suit I will wear on stage. They can match their corporate logo. They just like purple, whatever the deal is. And then it actually goes on my calendar so I know what to pack when I show up. And people love it. They talk about it all the time. They mention it in my introduction all the time on stage. It's been really effective. For the consulting side of our business, we are just finalizing the test phase right now, but I can't tell you what it is. It's a secret.
I can't wait to find out what it is. I may bring you guys in as a consultancy just to find out what your talk trigger is, Jay. This is good. No, and that suit example is a great example where, and to your point, if you took away the Dress J process, you'd still have a great speaking
Yeah,
business.
and one thing I'll just point out on that, like I've had the suit thing for years. The key to a talk
Mhm.
trigger is it's an experience, right? It's not just if it's not an experience, it's a
Right.
bullet point, right? And so Jay wears plaid suits as a bullet point. You get to pick the suit is an experience, right? So that's a small yet really important distinction between sort of a feature, if you will, and a talk trigger. A talk trigger is something that you experience, and a bullet point is not.
Got it. That's great. Um, so, in our own business, I just want to explore this with you for a moment. In our own business, we are a video technology company. And when a new customer comes on board at a certain time or a certain value, we may actually ship them unexpectedly a small care package, which is what we call a video studio in a box. And so this great, nicely branded box shows up in the mail. What is this? They pop it open, and there's a camera, a tripod, and a little video card, actually, which then explains how they can go about using these assets to create great new content for their business, as well as some related information on best practices for how to get started and how to make use of that experience and that gift, if you will. Is that something that you would think of as a talk trigger? Is that you know a a bullet point in what we're doing? And can you think of any ways in which we might actually enhance that into a talk trigger experience with our audience?
I think it could be a talk trigger. Of course, you'd want to measure it using the two types of talkability: observed and surveyed talkability. Observed talkability is when customers mention it to sales reps, they mention it to customer success managers, they mention it in reviews on G2 Crowd, places along those lines. They email it to you. They say to you they noticed it and appreciated it. Surveyed talkability is when you actually send a survey to customers and say, maybe a month later, hey, so since you started working with us, have you told anybody about Vidyard? Yes or no. Then you ask them a second question. What did you say? Open ended, right? See if they mention the talk trigger. The third question is, did you mention any of these things? And you sort of give them a pick list. And one of those things is the talk trigger. And then you see whether or not they're like, oh, yeah, that video box, that was dope. So that's how we do measurement on the word of mouth side. In your case, I think it could be a talk trigger. Uh, the one part that you might explore is the branded part, because I presume it's branded for you. If you used PFL or somebody like that and branded it for them,
Right.
now I think it's got a little more inherent talkability.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I love that, and I think it's something where if it can actually give them relevance and value, but it prompts them to
Yes.
share with others.
Yes. So we would categorize that as talkable usefulness, which is one of the five types of talk triggers. Is usefulness is one of them. And for your case, it'd probably be both. It's both usefulness because you're actually you're teaching them how to make video, and also talk about generosity because, of course, you're giving them a camera. So many of the best talk triggers actually live in two of the camps, two of the five.
Brilliant. Okay, we won't spoil the rest of the specifics around the talk triggers because we're going to get people to get the book and to learn more online about the specifics of how to create, measure, and ultimately enable talk triggers in their own markets. Let's quickly dive into the point we were just leaning on, which is sort of relevance and usefulness, and even outside of the scope of talk triggers. I've heard you say that marketers can succeed in two ways. You can be hyper emotional or you can be hyper relevant. And I think these are, of course, super important. Once you actually have people's attention, you're generating that word of mouth. If you don't then create that connection afterwards, then it's all for naught. How do you think about that in today's marketing world, these ideas of relevance and emotion, and how is that again influencing how marketing teams are building out their strategies?
I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter where the prospect is in the funnel. It's all about quid pro quo, right? You are asking them to trade attention, right, for
Yep.
something. And what I hear from marketers all the time now is that our customers, our prospects are just busy. They're too busy, right? They're too busy to attend the
Right.
webinar. They're too busy to watch the video. They're too busy to download the ebook, and that's not true. It's not about that. It's not about being busy. If somebody says that they don't have time to consume your content or do whatever you need them to do to get to the next funnel stage, what they really mean, but they won't say, it's not about time. What they really mean is that what you have presented to them is not relevant enough. And I know this because when you give a prospect the information that they need, exactly what they need, and you give it to them in the format they prefer, and you give it to them at the time they need it, they will consume it, right? The time needed to consume it magically appears, right? So relevancy creates time, and relevancy creates attention. Now, the other way you can do that is by creating a reaction. So even if it's not relevant per se, right? Even if it's not, oh, I do need to know that spec sheet, or I did need to know what the refund policy was, or I did need
Yeah.
to know use cases or case studies or whatever. Even if it's not that, if you can somehow make them laugh or cry, the time needed to do that will also magically appear, right? So you really only have a three-legged stool, right? It's either usefulness, which is why I wrote the book Utility.
Yep.
It's make them laugh or make them cry or make them mad. But I always felt like that's a little dangerous for business in some cases, but maybe not. Like you look at with Nike and Kaepernick, and there's a lot more. Mark Schaefer talks about this a lot in his new book. There's a lot more brands willing to upset a portion of the prospective customer base to win
Right.
fans amongst the remainder. And so maybe it isn't a three-legged stool. Maybe it's a table, and the table is. I'm creating furniture now on the show, real time. And so the table would be super useful, funny, sad, anger, right?
Yep.
Those are your four approaches. Pick one.
Let me ask you one last question here, Jay. Now, you have two
I
kids.
do.
Is that correct? You do. And, they've gone through these teenage years, screenagers, as we like to refer to them
Yes.
now. And let me ask you, what have you learned firsthand from interacting with your screenagers as it relates to the world of how we, communicate and engage with the millennial and Gen X audience as they are going to become a bigger part of who we're marketing and selling to?
And it's a bummer because when my son goes to college in September, I'm going to lose my R&D lab here at home. It's I'm going to have to adopt somebody who's like maybe 13. So if anybody knows anybody out there, you let me know. Give me a quick call. Preferably a well-mannered kid. Um, it, I would say two things. One, clearly you and I think a lot about video in business. Your new state of video in business report, by the way, is fantastic. Um, and you and I are both obviously big proponents of that because of all the data and all the trends and video's innate power as a storytelling medium and the things that you can do with it in terms of building in CTAs and analytics and all the Vidyard things, customization, personalization, one-on-one video. But take that bullishness that we share and multiply it by an infinite percentage, and you have young people. So I'm a big sports fan, and my son is as well. Probably not an accident. And it is not atypical for he and I to be together sort of at breakfast time, and we will both be on ESPN looking at whatever. And as you probably know, ESPN typically does stories where on the page, the top of the page is a video, and then beneath the video is the text of the story. Same story, video followed by text. And this happens with regularity, Tyler. I will look over, and he is watching video of the same story that I am reading. Because for him, and his sister, video is their first, second, and third choice. And for me, despite how bullish I am on video, there are definitely circumstances where I'm like, yeah, I could turn on the volume on my phone, but I could also just read this. That's not that hard. I mean, I've written 6 books, right? And my mom was an English teacher. My mom was not a video professor. She was an English teacher, right? So, I still subscribe to multiple daily newspapers that come, a guy brings them to my house, right? So I am that old. But for them, they would just as soon everything be video, like all the things, right? So that's first difference. Second difference that I think is really important is you would think, okay, that this idea of broadcasting and creating an audience, which sort of began with the early days of social media and was driven by people like us, and let's amass and accumulate followers and fans and likes and all that. You would think that that would just sort of, the trajectory of that would be here, but it's actually not. So there are certainly a number of young people who do that. There's YouTube celebrities and there's Instagram celebrities and TikTok celebrities, and all that is true. But on the whole, my observation of Gen Z is that they don't want that. They don't want to broadcast. They don't want many thousands of people to see what they're doing on Instagram stories. What they want is what Snapchat's founder Evan Spiegel calls the phone book model of relationships, where they have a set number of 2, 5, 8, 12, 20 people that's their posse, man, and they communicate to that posse a million times a day in a very intimate way. But they don't really care if a 21st person sees their thing, which is a fundamental difference to how I think, how you think, how our contemporaries think. And it's something that's going to shake up this business big time in the future years.
Now, Jay, one more thing that if we can get you to quickly let us know, where can people find or follow you, find more information about Talk Triggers, about your consulting business and others? Please let us know.
I'm a guy who probably has too many websites. You can find information about Talk Triggers at talktriggers.com. All kinds of free resources there too, by the way, about word of mouth. The main website is convinceandconvert.com, where we've got literally 5,000 plus free articles for marketers and business owners. We've got a network of podcasts, webinars, videos, all kinds of stuff at convinceandconvert.com. You can find about me as a speaker at jaybaer.com, Jaybaer.
Giving your customers a truly unique and memorable story to tell, and backing it up with content and programs that are hyper-relevant and at times emotional. It's an unconventional approach to building your brand and generating demand through the power of real human conversation. But at a time when buyers are much more likely to trust their peers than to trust a brand, it might just be one of the most important investments you make in the coming years. And if you take just one thing away from this conversation with Jay, let it be a reminder that word of mouth and true acts of customer advocacy don't just happen by accident. It takes an intentional and methodical approach to creating conversations through the idea of Talk Triggers. Thanks for joining us on Creating Connections, brought to you by the fine folks here at Vidyard. If you enjoyed the show, give it a like or a share, and hit that subscribe button for future episodes. And if you want to take Creating Connections to go, check out the podcast version now available on your favorite podcast platform.